Since the release of Engage's DLC, I've seen a lot of players struggle with Tiki's paralog, with the core issue being the seemingly infinite reinforcements. On the blind playthrough, you're likely to have started fighting in the fortress when the reinforcements appear, forcing you to continuously fend off enemies in the south while still making progress towards opening Tiki's room in the north. Once players find out that the reinforcements are finite, the instinct is to wait at their spawn point and burn through all 8 waves before approaching the rest of the map. This works, but it's very tedious, and I'll propose an alternative approach: waiting before you have to fight the reinforcements in the first place. Of course, that's not as easy as it sounds, with the reinforcements spawning as early as turn 13, and many features of the map that scare the player into slowing down. So I'd like to demonstrate how you can keep up a casually fast pace, even without a crazy setup. I'm playing this on Maddening just about as soon as possible, after completing Chapter 6 and Anno's Paralog. I'm not using any DLC or Heroes bonus items, and my team should be pretty standard. I would actually expect your team to look different, depending on when you play the map and who you've trained, so the important part is just having A units that can fill each role. First, I have Alir as a strong promoted combat unit with Marth. Getting a bunch of levels of the Mercurius to promote a unit as soon as you get a Master Seal is already a common strat, and this gives us a unit to hold forward while killing enemies. And if you can, I'd recommend inheriting Cancer, which has a unique application to this map that will help them cover a ton of ground. Then I have Alfred and Saline as Sigurd and Celica users with competent offense and bulk. To that extent, the Sigurd user appreciates a hard-hitting weapon, and the Celica user appreciates the early Seraphobe, an HP tonic, or a promotion. Next I have Chloe and Yunaka as filler combat units, which can take any extra emblems if you have them, and Etier as an archer that can one-shot Phantom Worms. Lastly, I have Anna as a Makayo user with Obstruct, and Fram as a secondary staff units. As for the overall structure, I'd roughly break down the map into 5 phases. 1. Getting inside, 2. Clearing the central hallway, 3. Splitting up to simultaneously tackle each remaining hallway, 4. Opening the doors, and 5. Beating Tiki. Alright, now let's go ahead and get moving.
Here goes.
The first obstacle is a really dodgy thief on a protection tile. To avoid getting caught up trying to land attacks, I use an engage attack right away for a perfect fit. The thief isn't very bulky, so Lodestar Rush should be able to one round. Alternatively, a backup unit can set up a few chain attacks at a fixed 80% hit, after which the Celica user can finish the kill, ignoring terrain avoid with a Mystic tag, or using a Surge Jump for perfect hit if they're a Mage Knight.
Happy to help.
The second obstacle is the Freeze Martial Monk. To avoid anyone getting stuck behind, the first instinct is to send Chloe up to defeat them. However, they're decently bulky, so if Chloe is a filler combat unit, this will take several turns, and even if she can one round, this is still a detour that we don't want a strong combat unit to take. So instead, we can just walk past the Martial Monk, taking advantage of their AI to ensure no one gets stuck in a freeze loop. They prioritize targeting your closest unit, so you can just leave someone behind that doesn't mind getting hit by freeze, while everyone else strolls past. The Sigurd user has inherent freeze immunity from Headlong Rush, and it's okay to leave them in the back for a turn, as they can catch up with their high move. Even when moving full move, it takes 2 turns to get everyone out of freeze range, so we have to leave someone who doesn't care about freeze nearby again. This time, I choose Saline while she weakens the Lance Fighter. She and Alfred are going to team up against the first Phantom Worm next turn, so I need Alfred to keep moving, and Saline will be able to reach with Warp Ragnarok while also getting herself out of freeze range. With the first area handled, we can look to the entrance of the fortress, where we have to fight through a few fighters. They get to use the first set of frost tiles for a +2 movement boost, so we can't get the jump on them on player phase. Instead, I'll be leaving Alir in range to fight on enemy phase, one rounding with Mercurius. I use Obstruct here so everyone else can continue moving forward, while the Axe Fighters are forced to attack into Alir. It's not that everyone has to move full move every turn, but I think it's a good practice to consider when you can, so you can take a little extra time fighting the big enemy formations. The general cycle this creates is rushing a lead combat unit forward to draw over enemies, taking the next player phase or 2 to finish them, which then clears the way for everyone to start rushing forward again. This doesn't sound too different from typical Fire Emblem, but we have the tools to get the lead combat units really far ahead, thanks to Sigurd's Gallop, Celica's Warp Ragnarok, Cancer on the Marth user, and Frost tiles. This means everyone else needs to be holding forward whenever possible, if we want to minimize turns spent just catching them up. The other big difference for performing the typical Fire Emblem loop is the Phantom Worms. They can freeze your lead combat unit for a turn, their bulk means you need to dedicate several standard attacks to kill them, and their high-range, defense-ignoring attacks spread a lot of damage throughout the process. The counterplay to all this is just running up and defeating them on player phase, denying them a chance to freeze or damage anyone. The numbers may be a little tight depending on your setup, but you should be able to team up for the kill with a Warp Ragnarok into a big momentum-boosted attack from the Sigurd user. This basically just turns the worms into an extra task to complete while drawing over the next set of enemies. Here I leave Saline in range of a mage, and to be thorough I use Obstruct so they have to attack Saline from her northwest. This way, Yunaka can reach to finish the kill next turn, giving us enough actions to defeat both incoming mages and the Lance Fighter in the south. My Saline has a Seraph Robe, so she can survive the Lance Fighter and Mage, but if your Celica user can't survive both attacks, then you can just wait to provoke the mages until next turn. There is room to wait a couple extra turns throughout the clear, but it's a good habit to consider when you can keep progressing. By turn 4, I'm willing to say we've moved on to the second phase, as the main combat units start clearing the central hallway. We can now start taking advantage of the Frost ourselves, which not only gives +2 move at the start of your regular action, but also for Canter. As such, the Sigurd user and whoever else has Canter inherited can especially afford to stick back to clean up enemies, as they can quickly get back to the lead. The 4-move Canter is also going to let Alir move back and forth between the eastern and northern sections once we split up. And even for units without Canter, timing everyone's actions to end on Frost tiles when possible still helps you to rush forward on the off turns where your filler units are just catching up. One issue you might come across though is that flyers ignore terrain effects, including Frost's movement boost. So if you have someone like Chloe as the Sigurd or Marth user, they won't be able to make as many detours while staying in the lead. You can still make it work of course, you just might have to cash in more of those spare turns. With our player phase kills complete, I'm immediately drawing over the next enemies, leaving Alfred in range of the worm. I did say the counterplay to defeating the worms is running up and killing them on player phase, but you won't always have the Warp Ragnarok into Sigurd combo available, and we have to get in range of this worm in particular to get them moving. Fortunately, Alfred's headlong rush means he won't get frozen, so we can pick up the kill on the following player phase and keep moving. On the same turn that I defeat the northern worm, I'm also going to start shooting down the 2 worms sitting behind the central hallway's walls. They'll start moving once we fight enemies in the north, so we might as well get our player phase kills on them now while they're sitting targets. At base, Etier one-shots these level 11 worms with a Steelbow +1 with a +1 Might Engrave, and +2 strength between Emil and Bondring. The worms get stronger the later you play the map, but you can make use of new resources and stronger units to keep up with the Oko threshold. To list a few examples, there's Alchrist with 1 more base strength, Roy for up to +5 strength, the Roy Engrave for 3 more effective damage, and a Steelbow +3 for 6 more effective damage. There's also Divinely Inspiring for +3 damage, and Spur Attack for +2, but their adjacency condition might not always work out in this approach. Also, the worm in Tiki's room is just a bit stronger than the others, so if an archer can reach the regular Oko threshold on their own, you have Divinely Inspiring as an option to also Oko Tiki's worm. Lastly, I'll mention the Edelgard bracelet, which gives at least a couple points of strength and dexterity for your archer. Alternatively, the Edelgard bracelet can turn anyone into a worm killer when engaged, using the Fallen Star combat art or Houses Unite to get access to the Fail Knot. It has the same might as our engraved Steelbow +1 and 3 range, making the Edelgard user a good emergency worm delete button. You have to have the Edelgard bracelet to get to Tiki's Paralog in the first place, but I know some players like to pick and choose which aspects of the DLC they use, so I figured I would ignore it for this demonstration. Similarly, there's not much reason to not have the hero's bonus items at this point, so if your Sigurd user has sword or lance access, then they can use the Folkvanger or Fensilier for a lighter, more accurate alternative to a steel weapon. But I wanted to demonstrate that a forged steel works just fine if you happen to not use the hero's weapons. After defeating all the worms in the central hallway, the only remaining enemies for this phase are the Sword Fighter, Axe Fighter, and Archer. Depending on your setup, you might be able to take them all out on the same player phase they start moving, and then instigate one of the other hallways on enemy phase. I don't think this is necessary though, and Etier needs this turn to shoot the final worm anyway, so I think it's okay to leave one of the enemies alive, and wait until next turn to move forward. There shouldn't have been a need for the Makai user to engage earlier, so they can get some long distance healing in now, making sure any surviving enemies can't kill anyone. In this case, I get a lucky crit with Yunaka, so I could have beaten the Axe Fighter and then had Alfred canter in range of the western hallway. For consistency's sake though, I'm just going to wait with Alfred and Saline, knowing that one of them could have finished the Archer, and that we'll have plenty of actions next turn to defeat the Axe Fighter. If your Sigurd user is strong enough, they might be able to Oko Archers, at which point you actually might be able to get all 3 player phase kills consistently. Vander and Louis can be a bit stronger than Alfred, with Vander using stronger axes, and Louis having higher strength. Louis' lower move might force you to spend some turns to get good positioning though, and he can't safely draw over worms if they're fast enough to double him. As for Vander, he's statistically comparable to a trained Alfred, but you'll need to keep him engaged for Rider's Bane access when enemy phasing all of the sword enemies. I also got lucky with Alfred dodging the Axe Fighter, but we should have more than enough units around to get the kill, even if Alfred didn't get a counterattack off. Apart from that, we can now switch our attention to tackling the 3 branching hallways. The timeline is to wait on the sigil in the north, which opens the door to the western room, so that you can wait on the western sigil to finally open the door to Tiki's room in the east. Of course, it'll be way too slow to walk your entire army from one destination to the next, so you have to do some splitting up. What I'll recommend is that the competent Sigurd and Celica users tackle the western hallway all on their own, while the Marth user bounces back and forth between the northern and eastern hallways. There's no need to activate the northern sigil until the western group has reached the western room anyway, so we might as well take some time to defeat the first group of enemies in the eastern hallway. The worms in both hallways will start moving once you draw over the enemies in front of them, so no need to worry about getting frozen here. This does mean you have to fight the worm alongside 2 other enemies, but everything should line up to beat both groups by the end of next turn. The Marth user can use the rapier to one down the armor, the Sigurd and Celica users have had opportunities to recharge their emblem meters, and the eastern worm will fly right into range of the archer. Fighting both of these groups at once might seem a little concerning, but remember that the main threat is the phantom worms, and as long as you get them out of the way without facing a counterattack, you should be fine even if other enemies are left alive. In my case, Etier does get one-rounded by sword fighters, but by having the Marth user engaged for rapier access, we also have Lodestar Rush available, and we might as well use it to get rid of the eastern sword fighter to keep Etier safe. This may seem like a waste, but there will be an opportunity to recharge their emblem meter before fighting Tiki anyway. For the western group, I will say that I put myself in a tough situation by having Alfred doll over the sword fighter while waiting on the emblem energy tile. Now we have to defeat the sword fighter for Alfred to reach the worm, without using his or Saline's attack. The worm is actually close enough that Alfred doesn't need to be engaged for Gallop to reach, so I could have just left him without a full emblem meter and drew over the sword fighter from any other tile. However, I'd like to show that if your Sigurd user needs the extra momentum damage to kill the worm, then it is possible to have them engaged for Gallop this turn. In the end, I leave a sword fighter and armor alive in the west, and I've also taken the opportunity to draw over the western mage with Saline. The Celica user should not expect to survive all 3 enemies, but we can manipulate enemy AI to get the sword fighter and armor to attack Alfred instead. Enemies love chain attacks and engage, and by leaving Alfred adjacent to the sword fighter at the start of enemy phase, both them and the sword armor will attack into Alfred for an easy chain attack opportunity. As a result, Saline can safely start fighting the mage now, but I'll admit this is mostly unnecessary unless you're activating the northern sigil this turn. Otherwise, Alfred and Saline have several turns to finish the surviving enemies and recharge their engage meters before the western room opens up. You just have to make sure your Celica user doesn't get in range of the Martial Monk's freeze range again, if you didn't defeat them earlier. By now, the big groups of enemies are all finished, and there's just a few stray enemies to kill before opening the final set of doors. Because of the Frost Canter boost, I'm able to get Alear in range of the Axe Armor in the north before her engage meter runs out, which means she can one-round them on enemy phase with the Rapier. The armor has 2 range with a hand axe, but they should still attack with their 1 range Iron Axe if possible, because it has more expected damage. They may not be threatening, but you still want to quickly defeat this northern group, as they're blocking the path to the Sigil. A lot of units will have an option for the armor after a promotion, but I'd like to show that anyone can rely entirely on Marth's Rapier for these armor kills. It's just that if you're using someone like Yunaka, or I guess Lance Griffin Chloe, you'll need to time the engage turns a little more closely. And again, I'll mention that if you use Chloe or some other flyer as the Marth user, their higher move might not make up for ignoring Frost, so you might have to go a bit slower or else not have them take as many detours. If you can one-round the Axe Armor on enemy phase, then you not only get them out of the way, but you also make room for the Martial Monk to attack into you. This means you should just need 1 attack to finish them on player phase, clearing the way for someone to reach the Sigil next turn, while everyone else can start moving east. Defeating the Martial Monk now also gives you the Rewarp Staff, with enough time left for someone to use it to reach the Silver card. This is basically the entire reason I brought Fram, as the Micaiah user should help with the Tiki fight, and I have no other staff users. One of the chests in the western room does have warp, so if your Celica user is promoted and has staff access, they can warp the Sigurd user over to get the silver card instead. If you go this approach, I think it's worth considering deploying another filler combat unit over a secondary healer like Fram. If you go fast enough, they won't be able to reach anyone to heal anyway, and an extra combat unit means you might not need the Marth user to cover so much ground by themselves. The eastern hallway still has a couple more enemies left, but the northern and western groups are ready to start the sequence of activating sigils and opening doors. Because we split up, we can do this in quick succession, with Alfred and Saline taking on the Worm and Axe Cavaliers as soon as they start moving. If you wanted to go even faster, you could set them up to attack the Worm as soon as the room opens up, then canter onto the sigil to also open Tiki's room the same turn. I think this is totally unnecessary though, and you should absolutely have a couple turns to defeat the western group while the Marth user and filler combat units approach Tiki in the east. There's still a decent amount of terrain for them to cross, and there's also a couple Emblem energy tiles that you can go out of the way to wait on. At this point, you should have a clear idea of how many turns you have left until the reinforcements catch up, so you can make the call on exactly how long to prepare before unlocking either door. The key points are that the Sigurd and Marth users are ready to engage, with the Celica and Micaiah users being nice to have available as well. Also, if you're relying on Divinely Inspiring to one-shot Tiki's Worm, then Alear needs to be ready to move alongside the Archer. Something to note is that while the rooms are locked, you can't target enemies inside for attacks on player phase, but you can still counterattack them on enemy phase. As such, you could try to defeat them before even opening the doors, but I think this takes more time to set up than it's worth. If the eastern group has to wait several more turns for the western group to activate their sigil, then I suppose you might as well preemptively defeat Tiki's Worm. However, the Archer would get frozen, and you couldn't set up Divinely Inspiring without leaving Alear in the Worm's 3 range. And regardless, if the western group has to take that long to defeat their enemies, I worry you might be giving the reinforcements too much time to catch up. Ideally, the Sigurd and Celica user can just defeat them all in one turn. The Worm and Cavaliers all move unprovoked, putting themselves in a formation perfect for an override. Sigurd's Rider's Bane should be enough to outgo the Cavaliers, but it's weaker than a steel weapon, so I wouldn't expect the Celica user to be able to finish the kill on player phase. The good news is that even if the Celica user doesn't kill, they can still trap them in place, forcing the Worm to attack at one range and take a counterattack on enemy phase. With just Tiki's group left, we can go ahead and open the final door. If you had defeated the Worm on the previous enemy phase, you could just run up and try to defeat Tiki on the same turn you open the door, which would put a quick end to the map. There's no need to worry about this though, unless the reinforcements are like right behind you, so we can just take this turn to defeat the Phantom Worm, then set ourselves up to fight Tiki at the choke point over a few turns. I have Alir as the Marth user, and it works out so they can move right from an Emblem energy tile to a spot that provides Etier Divinely Inspiring to Oko this slightly stronger Worm. We absolutely can't leave Etier in front though, and depending on your pace, you might be able to put another unit in front to hold the choke points. However, if someone were to wait one tile in front of Etier, then Tiki could block the hallway and limit the number of spaces we can attack her from. And if someone waits 2 tiles in front of Etier, then that gives room for Tiki and the Cavaliers to potentially team up for a kill. What I'll be doing instead is using an Augment Obstruct, which will keep Etier safe and force Tiki to stay in place for a turn. It just so happens that for my pace, the reinforcements show up just as I start fighting Tiki. This indicates that we have around 5 more turns to wrap up the chapter, which should be plenty for beating Tiki. If you're still opening doors when the reinforcements show up though, you'll have to defeat Tiki a bit faster, which means the Lance Cavaliers have got to go. Fortunately, the Marth user is guaranteed to have a good matchup against one because of the Rapier, so it's just a matter of teaming up for the other with the filler combat units. I need Chloe to land a Rider's Bane attack, but if you had any other Emblem attacks available, then now would be the time to use them. There is also just the Time Crystal, so if you have to rely on a low-hit Rider's Bane attack, you can switch your attack order to give them more opportunities to land. On top of the Augment Obstruct plays, having Micaiah engaged for the Tiki fight is also nice for long-range heals. I would expect Tiki's Tail Smash to 2-hit KO everyone, so you want to heal them, and doing so at range leaves space for the archer to attack from. The Micaiah user only has a couple turns of long-range healing, but this should be enough as Tiki's defense isn't super high, and you should be able to get off all the damage between a strong Marth user and archer chip. Also, we can bring our other units into the room to push for the final kills at any time. The Marth user and archer just have to burn through the first health bar. Oh, and a funny detail is that because Tiki prefers to attack with Tail Smash for maximum damage, she always attacks last, so you don't actually need to heal the Marth user if they can finish a health bar on enemy phase.
I was wondering...
As we finish fighting Tiki, I'd like to give some final considerations. To clarify, you should not try to replicate my clear action for action, or have your team look just like mine. Beyond variation in available resources and enemy quality, this will also just make the map harder. As long as you have a unit that can fill the important roles and are proactive in your progression of each stage, you can use your own judgment to fill out the details. The map may try to slow you down, but don't let it. Get the jump on the Phantom Worms before they can disrupt you, use Frost to your advantage, and don't be scared to split your army up at the end. The only specific combat benchmarks I would plan for are teaming up for the Phantom Worm kills with the Sigurd user and Celica's Warp Ragnarok, outpulling the worms with an archer, and maybe one-rounding the armors with the Marth user. If you're concerned about the survivability of the Celica and Sigurd users, you might also check if an HP, defense, or speed tonic would let them avoid getting 2-hit KO'd or doubled. As for skills, if you're really concerned about getting past the martial monks or fighting the worms, you can inherit Headlong Rush on some units, but I don't think it's really worth the SP. The Sigurd user has it naturally, and if you're in control of the map, you shouldn't need anyone else to get hit by freeze anyway. The only skill inheritance I would recommend if you don't care about saving SP for something else is hit plus 10 on the Sigurd user, and Canter on anyone who can get it. It's already nice to have for the rest of the game, and getting 4-move Canter from Frost is really awesome for this map in particular. And yeah, that's Tiki's Paralog completed without fighting any reinforcements. Hopefully, I was able to make the map seem a bit more approachable, so next time you want to unlock the DLC bracelets, you know you can quickly tackle the map head-on. If you enjoyed, consider leaving a like and subscribing, and let me know if there's any similar content you'd like to see. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.